Hi again, chess enthusiasts. We are now at the number 6 problem stage in the 12 Soviet chess puzzles, and this is of course the halfway stage, and I'm very pleased to be at it, although I must confess that this particular problem has given me a bit of a tottering time. Just take a good look at it. We have a situation here where material is even, 2 rooks, 4 minor pieces and a pawn on each side. The black king yet again is in one of those curious positions in these problems, and in most problems in fact, where it cannot move without going into check. And so that is always worth keeping in mind. There are some key squares as well, and I'll just give you a clue. They are b4, d4, f5, d5 and e6. Now, looking at this position, ideally white would like to be able to mate with knight to e6, but at the moment that is impossible because black's rook on e1 would simply take it off the board. So most people would think, well, if we block the e line it would stop knight e6, and true enough it would, but I think just taking a quick look at this, you don't even need to demonstrate it on a practical board. Just play bishop to e2, and of course the rook would take it off, and then it regains control over the e6 square, so knight e6 again isn't possible. So we have a bit of a problem there if we want to execute knight e6. So perhaps it pays not to concentrate too heavily on that. I didn't. Instead, and this is not the solution, but initially I looked at the possibilities of b4. Now, if you look at the bishop on c1, if you could get that to b4, it would be checkmate. Just take a look on the pocket chess set here and you'll see what I mean. Now this bishop here, if we could get it into that position, that would be checkmate. But that's easier said than done. So my first thought was, well, let's play it to d2, and that threatens checkmate bishop b4. There's only one move that black can play here in order to get out of that, and that is knight c2. Now here, of course, you don't want to take the knight away, threatening mate admittedly, because black's rook on e1 would go to a1, check, and cause all sorts of problems, and it certainly wouldn't be a mate in 3. So that's no good. So after bishop d2, knight c2, we can't play bishop b4 and we can't take the knight. So then it occurred to me, well, this square here needs to be protected. The idea, of course, was removing this rook away from the d line. So I thought to myself, we'll have a look at bishop c3, and that looked really good. It looks to me as though it's threatening checkmate rook c8, which of course it is. So we're switching our attention from mating on b4 down at this end. The only problem with this is that it is cooked with rook e7. And then of course if you play rook c8, black plays rook c7 and interposes, and there's nothing that can be done. You don't have a mate in 3 moves with that. So that is no good. Instead of bishop c3, what about taking the rook? Now many would say, well, this enables you then next move to play knight e6 checkmate. It would. Just take a look at it. Knight e6 checkmate, just to prove it. There you go. No problem. I mean, this rook is covering the b line. This rook is covering the d line. First rook is covering the 6th rank. The pawn is protected. So it would, and the knight is giving check. So nothing's attacking the knight. So it would indeed be checkmate. The only problem with once you've taken the rook after bishop d2, knight c2, bishop e1, is this most annoying rook e5. And what rook e5 does is it takes the place of the rook that you've taken, covering e6. It also maintains its cover, in fact, preventing rook d5 mate. Just to demonstrate, if it were to move away like that, you just bring the rook in there, and that would be checkmate. Very nice, isn't it? So what that proves is that bishop d2 is not the correct move. I played around with it for a bit. I couldn't quite bring myself to believe that I couldn't do it with it. But I'm afraid you can't. And you're all welcome out there to have a play around with it, but I have played around with it for rather longer than I usually do, just to satisfy myself that it can't work. I'd like it to work, but I'm afraid it just wouldn't work. So just go back to the original position, which is there. And what I would say again is these are the key squares. We're not ruling out a mate on b4. We're not ruling out this knight having to come to c2. And we're still keeping in mind rook d5, knight e6. But as can be appreciated, this is rather annoying here, because it's stopping rook d5 as an alternative to knight e6. This bishop here is a nuisance because it's covering this square. Now if this bishop weren't on there, say just whip it off for a moment, you'd be threatening this, which again is checkmate, because the knight nicely covers the pawn here and the rook covers the d-line, b6, no problem. But with the bishop there, of course, you can't do that. So what do you do? What do you do to break the stranglehold that that rook on g5 and that bishop on h7 are exerting on white in this position? Just take a look at it. Pause the video by all means, and then I'll give you the key move. It's not an easy move to find, which does prove that these problems are getting more difficult as we move along. In practical play, I think unless you were a super GM, you would not find this move. I'd be surprised if you did. But like I say, if you keep your mind on, the black king cannot move, so there's no problem there. Just keep your mind on breaking this connection along the fifth rank and along the b1 to h7 diagonal, so that either the rook can come in at d5 and mate, or the knight can come from f4 into d3. Any ideas at all? Okay, well, I'll give you the key move. Instead of bishop d2, and bishop e2 wouldn't work because the rook would just take it and renew the control over e6, preventing knight e6, so that just wouldn't work at all. The move in question is bishop g4. Just take a look at that. That at once changes the complexion of this game, because the threat there is bishop f5. So if you just imagine that black were to forego moving, white decides to play bishop f5. That's the second move for white. Now, if black were to take this, you're breaking that diagonal chain of which I was speaking just a moment ago, and the knight on f can come into d3 and deliver checkmate. Alternatively, the bishop is to be taken by the bishop. That's breaking the chain of the rook on the fifth, and rook d5 is mate. Unfortunately, we can't mate with knight e6. It's a nice mate, but it just doesn't work in this particular sequence. It comes in, but not just yet. So, as already stated, bishop f5 is the threat. Now, if black does nothing to stop it, it's going to be made next move. So, evidently moving such as this knight would make no difference. It's not going to exercise any control over f5, nor this bishop. It's the wrong colour. And you see, once the bishop moves, even if black were to do something like this, thinking, oh well, I'll take the knight, then it can't move to d3. You just play in here, and if you take the knight, well, you've rook d5 mate, so that just doesn't work. And again, if the rook takes or the bishop takes, it blocks one or other of those lines, so that just doesn't work at all. So this is where bishop g4 is a very troublesome move for black. I think that what I would say is, without bishop g4, black would probably be able to escape and may well draw this game because material is even, and I don't think there's any great positional advantage for either side. White probably has the best of it because black's king, like I say, is caught. So it's a question of bringing about a mating net over the black king. If you can do that, then well, of course, the game is over. So moving this or moving this rook is not going to help, and I'll demonstrate why not in a moment or two. But let's just go through the moves. So we've demonstrated taking the other way. Just take here for a moment. Rook g4. Well then, as already stated, you have rook d5, and that is checkmate. So that doesn't work. What about bishop g6? Well, again, bishop g6 really is an inconsequential move. So it just enables us to demonstrate in practice now, with black having made a move, white does exercise his right to play bishop f5. And we run into what I've just described. If black takes it with the bishop, it's rook d5. If he takes it with the rook, it's knight on f to d3. Not with this knight, because you need that to cover the pawn. So that's fine, okay. Supposing black from h7, he's gone to g6. Supposing you were to go to f5, well, you just take the bishop, which is the equivalent to bishop f5, so there's no difference at all there. Supposing he goes to e4, what's he wanting to do here? Well, he's wanting to maintain the control over this to stop knight on f to d3. He's wanting to overprotect d5. Unfortunately, this does allow knight e6 because it breaks the chain of the rook here. So that's checkmate as well. So no good, no good, no good. What about to there? Well, clearly knight on f to d3, that's just facilitating white's checkmate. The whole purpose is really for black to maintain control over such a square or series of squares. This in fact is a variation that can appear, and I have seen it in other problems, where you want to remove the piece where it's usually a bishop from one side of the board right to the other, so that you don't run into this business of being blocked. In other words, if this bishop were to come, where should we say, to here for instance, now bishop f5, the rook would be free to take it. Let's just demonstrate it. And then he couldn't play in here because the bishop would just whip it off, and the rook still maintains control over d5. So this is an interesting ploy in order to be able to continue to maintain control over what is an important square. In other words, here. Now, what is the reply to that? This is a difficult one. This bishop being here, of course. That's right, the black bishop's come down to c2. So it's bishop g4, bishop c2. It's white's second move. He can force checkmate from this position. but it's not easy to find. Although I've already given a clue early on with a variation that I thought would work but didn't. So for those of you who have recalled it, it is in fact bishop to c2. Now what's good about this now is that the bishop is occupying c2 and the knight can't come there, and next move bishop b4 mate, and there's nothing that can stop it, because this bishop, if this rook weren't here, it could come to here and take it or be taken by it, and so that would put a stop to it. But bishop d2 now works to a treat because the knight can't move to here, and next move of course, and it's all over. And nothing's attacking this knight, and the pawn is protected by the knight, and all the lines are covered. So that is perfect. So what's happened here really, you've forced black to rethink the whole position by threatening to block these lines, so he has to move his bishop to the other side. Now sometimes this works, but on this occasion it doesn't. Now many might be thinking, if we just put it back to how it was for a moment. Okay, instead of bishop to c2, what would happen if we played bishop to b1? And of course we're leaving this square available for the knight, aren't we? So many would say, well, surely you can't play bishop d2 there. Well, what do you think? Just take a look at it. Can you in fact play bishop d2? Well, would it be wise to play it? You can, and it's physically possible to play it. The square is available. But would it be wise to play bishop d2 there? Was there a better move? I mean, evidently here, as good as this idea is, it's only been used primarily to fox the opponent into playing it in a way that you really want it to play, so that you can execute checkmate perhaps somewhere else, either on e6 or on b4 or whatever. But playing that there now would have no effect, for the simple reason that black would just whip it off. He maintains control over d5 to stop rook d5. e6, knight e6 is out because of the rook. And of course now you can't play knight on f to d3 because the bishop would just whip it off. So really, in that context, bishop f5 really now would be no good. So I go back to the question, can you get away with bishop d2? Well, let's just have a look at it. That's the second move. What would you say if I were to say to you, no matter what black plays here, it's mate next move? You'd say, well, I mean, the c2 square is available. Oh, that stops bishop b4. Yes, but unfortunately, it blocks the bishop, and you now have knight on f to d3, mate. And that is checkmate. And that's wonderful. That's all those bishop moves covered, and none of them is of any use whatsoever. And clearly moving here, well, it would be mate on the move with knight on f to d3, so that's useful. So none of those bishop moves is any good. None of these pieces can afford to move here. This knight is quite useless, other than to go to c2. So after bishop to g4, what are we doing with these rooks then? Can they do anything else? Well, why don't we try rook on g to e5? What does that do? Well, it maintains pressure on here, doesn't it? And it maintains its control over d5. And we can't play knight on f to here. But there's a nice little trick here. Can you see it? Don't forget, this rook is needed here. It's not really needed for e6. This one was doing the job. So this one coming here is not really needed. So what happens when you play that? Check. That's white's second move. Black has a problem. He has to take the knight. And once he's taken the knight, it's rook d5 mate, because he's no longer on the 5th rank. So both these rooks here like this don't work. They allow a trick, knight e6 check followed by rook d5 mate. So that is no good. So what about, instead of rook on g to e5, because of what I've just said with the doubling of the rook, try this rook to here. What happens then? Well, this is a most interesting one, because this works the other way. We play rook d5 check. What, you say? Yeah. What can black do? Well, he can only take the rook, can't he? So, let's do it. And in so doing, he's committing harakiri, because knight e6 mate. Now then, isn't that a pretty mate? And if you noted all of this, how the bishop on h7, if impeded, allows knight on f to d3. Equally, if the rook on g5 is impeded, it allows rook d5. And when you try and work those two rooks together, now ordinarily, in this sort of a situation, two rooks working together would be admirable, but not in this particular case, because on the one hand, it allows the rook d5 mate, on the other, it allows the knight e6 mate. So we can employ the rook d5, we can have the knight e6, and also the bishop b4 as previously demonstrated. So this is full of different mates, and I couldn't quite believe it when I solved it. This is a really interesting problem, and rather more difficult than I think for number 6. I'd have put it further down the track, but the reasoning, of course, is that it's a mate in 3, so a mate in 3 is a mate in 3. But it's very difficult indeed to get this one, and for anyone out there who has managed to find all of that without watching this first, congratulations, you deserve to do well in chess, especially if you're not very old. You are a budding grandmaster, there's no doubt about that. So I trust that everyone enjoyed that. Just go back to the original position, there it is. This is one of a different sort of a setup, because material is even, whereas I think I'm correct in saying in the others there was a preponderance of material on one side against the other. So everything is even, it's just the positional difference that counts here. It's not as if you can say, oh, white has the 2 bishops. Well, black also has the 2 bishops. The fact that this knight is out of play here is not really that significant, because knight c2 is needed. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work in the variations that I've given. So that is a very pleasing result, and keep enjoying your chess. And I shall endeavour to present to you number 7 in the not too distant future. And bye-bye for now.